This is the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy. Andy Payton is the lead pastor at Methodist Temple United Methodist Church in Evansville, Indiana. Randy Moore is associate pastor at Methodist Temple. Their goal is to see Christ in everything and everyone.
Welcome into the podcast, everyone. I'm Pastor Randy Moore, joined as always by Pastor Andy Payton. And Pastor Andy, we're approaching Easter.
It is upon us. We're 2 weeks away?
Yeah.
Less than 2 weeks now.
Right. Holy Week is coming up. Palm Sunday is coming up this Sunday. We're going to look forward a little bit to that a little bit later in the podcast, but we're going to look back at last Sunday. Of course, we're in the season of Lent, which is preparation for Easter. So we talk about the condition of our souls as we open up these podcasts, and I keep coming back to, in my own mind, Kairos. I'm going to be previewing a couple of the talks I'm going to be giving on that weekend. And if you're not familiar with it, friends, it's a prison ministry called Kairos. And one of the pastors here, well, he's not one of our pastors. He happens to be a retired pastor. And one of our members and I will be going into that prison. I'm excited about it because the guys on our team who have been into the prisons for Kairos get so excited talking about their experiences. I'm a little bit anxious. I've never done this. I told the group in one of our early formations that the only times I have been into prisons were for executions. I've actually been for 3 executions inside prisons. Yeah. So this will be a different experience for me. And so that's what, when I think about the condition of my soul, I'm wondering about what kind of an impact this is going to have. And I always come back to like Matthew 25.
Right,
and,
the promise. I was sitting there thinking about the same thing. Well, I said, the promise is there. Christ will be in that.
Right.
In that experience.
That's exciting.
Yeah, definitely.
That's exciting. Okay. How about you?
How is it with my soul? I'm gearing up for Easter. I love it. Like every year, Holy Week forces me, or really better way to say it probably would be invites me to reflect on the pivotal moment of the Christian faith, which of course is that death and resurrection of Christ. And what is the meaning for that for our lives today? I love to sit and reflect on that because that's the hinge point really. And, I had someone tell me years ago, if you can't preach on Easter, you can't preach at all. So I always want to make sure I can preach on Easter, Right. And so, but the bigger question, and it's always life-giving, is to sit and think about this idea that life's bigger than death. What would it mean for me to live my life in such a way where I really, really believed that life is greater than death? That would have that has a major impact if you stop and just, in what ways am I giving in to death?
Right.
In what ways am I cultivating life? If this is our basic message, and so my soul, I guess, long answer here, is contemplating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. Okay, let's go back to last Sunday, and the lesson came from John, and we've been in the Revised Common Lectionary. Those are the lessons that are prescribed by the church, or at least a portion of the church. Those aren't ones that we just select or pull out of thin air or select one of our favorite passages. And it's a 3-year cycle. It goes Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then John gets sprinkled in all 3 of those years. And so John drops in here last Sunday with a well-loved story about Mary anointing Jesus. It's John 12, 1-8. I'll read it for us. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. There they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used it to steal what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." You pick up on something if you don't just hear this, but you read it, because you get these parenthetical statements from the writer, the one who was about to betray him. And then he said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used it to steal what was put into it. So the author of the Gospel of John has some very distinct
well, they've had some time to reflect on it. By the time that this is actually being written, you know.
Yeah. And you use this text, at least in the beginning, throughout, to talk about discipleship and who is it that we're going to follow.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to realize. It's not if I'm going to be a disciple. It's not if I'm going to follow. The question is really, who or what am I going to follow? Maybe to say it a different way, we as a human species are innately religious. I mean, I know that's a big statement, but if you really stop and think about it, we're going to become religious about something, and we're going to surrender our lives to something. And the question is, like, what is it going to be? Because the truth of the matter is, not all the things that we become religious about or surrender our lives to ultimately lead us to the same destination. And so in terms of the Christian faith, obviously the thing that, or the person we choose to follow is Christ. We choose to follow Jesus. And then that leads to another series of problems, because the truth of the matter is not all Christians agree, right? It's not Christianity, it's really Christianities. And so in the beginning of my sermon, I wanted to lay out, here are the three big, in my opinion, big things that define the Christian faith for me. And I would love to hear you talk about maybe what are some of the big things that define the Christian faith for you, Randy. But for me, when we're talking about Christianity, before we ever get into some sort of ethic, before we get into some sort of moral, I think it's important to note that Christianity primarily is about a presence, namely the presence of Christ. And Christ is the label that we use to talk about the sacred dimension of our lives. And so I think that's a very, very important thing to throw out there, because I can remember years ago when I was first starting ministry, I was over at a friend's house, and I think it was my friend's cousin who had showed up. And my friend invited his cousin to come to church because the pastor's there, right? And I will never forget the guy's response. He said, "I don't need to go to church. I don't need to become a Christian. It's all of this is a set of morals anyway." And yes, I mean, Christianity, it has a moral component. It has an ethical component. But the bigger component is this idea that my life is it's a spiritual life, right? You know, I mean, we are spiritual beings that have been created by God. And to start the Christian journey then becomes about, I become aware of this presence and this relationship with God that I've had from the moment I was created, or we were created, and we become aware of that and dial into that. The word we use for that presence, of course, is Christ.
Yeah, you said, who are we going to follow, because we're going to follow someone or something. It made me think about something that I heard recently, which really struck me. And it is this: we are going to have spiritual formation. Spiritual formation is not a decision that we make. We're going to be spiritually formed by something. What we really want is Christian formation, because we could be spiritual in a horrible way.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the thing that I would point to is it's helpful to consider, what is it we get emotional about? What is it we're truly passionate about? Now, those emotions and those passions, they didn't just happen overnight. They happened because of habits in our lives that we've performed, or to use another phrase, rituals in our lives that we've participated in again and again and again. And so really the question is, what is it we actually care about? And now we're getting into spiritual formation. Mm-hmm. And the more I reflect on it, the thing I'm starting to really come to appreciate even more is how critically important it is, again, to get our image of God right. because that's where it starts. Everyone has some sort of God or higher power that they're following after, that they're seeking. What is that? That basic question is so critical. There's a Latin phrase that I hear, it's being tossed around a lot online lately. The summum bonum, I think is what they call it. It's this idea that we all have this guiding principle that brings order out of our chaos, and it defines the goal for our lives. It's the summum bonum is like that anchor or that thing that we're striving toward that really orients everything else in our lives. And the Christian, goal is Christ. That's the goal. Yeah. And so becoming aware of that presence, though, once we become aware of it, it naturally begins to happen next that it affects how we live our lives. And so I become aware of Christ's presence, not only in my life, but in the world around me. The first thing that really begins to happen is I'm able to move beyond our distinctions, or the distinctions that often defines the world. Paul was famous for his verse or passage in Galatians where he says, there's no longer slave nor free, Jew or Gentile, male or female. We're all one in Christ. That's a huge statement. Because in the ancient world of Paul's day, when he says that, it was assumed that there was always going to be a hierarchy, right? Like it was just assumed. And all of a sudden here along comes Christianity in the ancient Roman world, and they say, no, we're all of sacred value. We're all of equal value. I don't think in the West, in Western culture, we appreciate that enough, how radical it is to say we're all valuable. It's reflected in the Declaration. We've been given by our Creator certain inalienable rights, right? It's there. It's the bedrock of our society. And I don't think we realize or appreciate how powerful that is, because the world, by and large, historically speaking, is hierarchical. Some people have been deemed as more valuable than other people historically, and it's in our world, even at the present moment. But to truly understand this idea that we're all in the presence of God and we're all of sacred value, it levels the playing field right away. And the line I often use in my Sunday school class is, we're not inclusive despite of our faith, but we're inclusive because of our faith. And so that inclusivity then, so once we begin to move past the labels, then it leads to what we call Christian love or agape love, which basically is I'm willing, or we become willing to put aside our own self-interest or our self-preferences and live for the well-being of others.
And you said that this gospel lesson, which you just heard read, is a wonderful example of what it means to live out what you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hadn't ever seen it before until I sat with it, preparing for the sermon. But, the story goes, Jesus goes to Mary Martha's house, and they throw him a thank you party because he raised Lazarus from the dead, which that's not a shocker, right? Right. That's the least they could do. And so Mary then dumps the perfume on Jesus' feet, which, as John explains, foreshadows Christ's death. And then Judas begins to complain why it wasn't the money, why wasn't that sold and the money given to the poor? And then comes the comment from Jesus, leave her alone. You always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. And that's one of those passages that has been misused historically, because you can see how people could manipulate that and kind of take that moment out of context and then allow that passage, the poor will always be among us, that line to give us permission not to care about the suffering of other people. But I think that misses the basic point of what Christ is saying. No, Mary does what's right. She concretely loves the person in front of her in an extravagant way. It happens to be Jesus Christ. If it was the poor, it would need to be the poor. If it was the rich, it would need to be the rich. Whoever it is, we concretely love them in a tangible way, in a flesh and bone sort of way. And I just find that to be a compelling image then of what it means to live out the Christian life. Basically, I love every person that God brings into my life as if they were Jesus Christ himself. That's the ethic.
What I love about this story, and I was almost going to preach this, and then we did that flip, and you preached instead. But what I really like about this is that after Mary displays this extravagant example of love, Jesus turns around on Monday, Thursday, right? Because we're going to have Palm Sunday on Sunday, then the following Thursday. We're recording on Tuesday, a week from this Thursday. We're going to be in the upper room with Jesus, and he is going to do something very, very similar. Yeah. Very, very similar. He's going to love those folks right in front of him.
He's going to
wash their feet.
Not just their feet, though. Judas's feet, too.
Right.
Judas is in it.
Yeah.
The betrayer, we already know he's going to betray. Mm-hmm. John's making that very clear in this passage. Mm-hmm. But he washes Judas's feet. Again, this is a radical ethic, because the human tendency is to say, well, I'll lay my life down for people that I like. I'll lay my life down for people that I agree with. I'll lay my life down with those that make me feel comfortable. But that's barely scratching the surface when we're talking about what does it mean to live the Christian ethic. No, the Christian ethic says, I lay my life down even for the betrayer. I live for the well-being of the person that I know is going to stab me in the back. Mm-hmm. That's some hard stuff. But that's the ethic. It really is. And if you stop and think about it, a society that's willing to practice that sort of ethic, that kind of society is able to have diversity. It's able to have differences. It's able to cross-pollinate one another because of those differences and because of that diversity. This is the bedrock of what makes the world go round when it comes to at least American culture to a certain extent. I'm not going to say we've always done it well, because obviously we've had some huge problems. But this basic storyline, this basic ethic and idea, it defines for us, right? Like the people that we should strive to become. And I fear, back to the Christianity versus Christianity's comment, I fear that much of the time Christianity is being utilized to do quite the opposite of this. It's basically being used to create a box for people that we force folks to live into if we're not careful, in almost an authoritarian type of way, which I don't see that in Jesus. I see Jesus washing Judas's feet, as you just pointed out, right? That's different. It's a much different ethic. Anyway, I came ready to preach today, I guess. But
well, I'll preach a little bit, because there's another thing about this story which I've heard told, which is not probably historically true, or there's no way to prove it historically, but it's a wonderful thing to think about. So Mary pours this, a year's worth of, this would have paid wages for an entire year.
Right.
She dumps the whole thing on his feet, and the fragrance filled the whole room. Well, we bathe daily. In that day and time, they didn't bathe daily. Someone speculated that it's possible that aroma was still on Jesus's body as he hung on the cross. And so in the midst of being betrayed by everybody scattered, there was the aroma of that love still with Jesus on the cross. Wow.
It's vivid. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it begs the question then, what does it mean to follow Jesus to the cross? Because he says that, right? Take up your cross and follow me. It's not just follow me. No, take up your cross and follow me. Mm-hmm. I've been reading up on that because of Holy Week,
Right.
And I came across an idea where if you stop and think about just the passion narrative itself, Jesus faces all the great fears that any human being would ever have. The fear of being betrayed, the fear of the tyranny of the state, the fear of the mob. Christ, he faces all of those things and chooses love anyway. Mm-hmm. The fragrance of that choice, right?
Yeah.
That's powerful stuff. And Christianity is not for the lighthearted, if you're going to take it seriously.
Right.
Anyone can manipulate a religion and use it to confirm whatever our egos think. But to really get at the crux, it's this passion and resurrection stuff and what's going on here. This is the ethic we're talking about. And the question becomes, so why don't we do it, right? I mean, that's the big question.
Yeah, and it's what makes Good Friday so important, right? And we miss that. Most of the larger percentage of our congregation and our Christian congregations will miss it because, our attendance will be down on those midweek services. But and the resurrection is wonderful. We're Easter people. We love that. But if we skip from Palm Sunday to Resurrection Sunday without pausing and considering what happened on that Friday, we miss everything you've been talking about.
Right. I mean, which has always been the challenge of the church.
Yeah.
You say attendance is down on Good Friday. It was down for Jesus too, right?
Right.
He's all alone.
Yeah.
His mom's there and a few others, but no one's there.
Right.
Because who wants to be a part of that? No one wants to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
But yet that's precisely what we're called to do, in a sense. So,
you had an example about how effective these little expressions of kindness can be when you talked about the $1 million or the offer of $1 million or the offer of a penny doubled over time.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why we fail to love, we fail to surrender ourselves, that kind of thing, is we live in a supersized culture, and if we're not careful, that culture that we live in will convince us to think that my little expression of love won't make a difference. Mm-hmm. What's the use? And so I came across an illustration recently that really, I think, hit it home, where the illustration was, imagine someone gave you the option of $1 million, or the other option was a penny, but the promise of the penny was that it would double in value every day over the course of 31 days. Mm-hmm. And so most people, of course, if they don't think about it, are just going to gravitate toward the $1 million. I mean, it's instant, right? I'm a millionaire. Boom, here we go.
Right.
But the reality is that penny that doubles in value every day, if it would double in value over the course of 31 days, it would be worth well over $10 million. And so I think for me, the point is how, and I take this idea from Eugene Peterson, who was a great scholar about a generation ago, who wrote the Message Bible. He did that translation of the Bible, but he talked about a long obedience over a long period of time. And that's what faithfulness is really like. You do the little things over a long period of time, and that's what ends up transforming lives. That's what ends up transforming culture. That's what can transform the world. But yet, we don't commit ourselves to that path because we want this instant gratification. And I think that's one of the problems we have in our world today, right? I mean, we want to take the fast track, the fast path, and we don't want that long obedience that he talks about.
And it comes back to those Christian practices that we've been talking about so much during the Lenten season. You got to work it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like fasting comes to my mind right now, that this denial of this basic need that we have as human beings of food. Mm-hmm. We're going to fast from food? Why? Well, because if we don't practice at denying ourselves, we're probably not going to get very far when it comes to this idea of obedience either. And so anyway, yeah. But I think more than anything else, the reason why we fail to love in this Christ-like way, in my opinion, and this is, I'm really just speaking from my own personal experience here. Mm-hmm. But I think people would probably go along with it, listener-wise. People who are listening to this probably would go along with it. I think the big issue when it comes to our failure to love is we try to live the Christ-like life without Christ. We have this tendency to think, I'm going to have to pull myself up by my bootstraps, and I'm going to go out and love. Well, and yeah, you can. Yeah, right? I'm not going to say you can't. You can. But the type of love that we've been talking about in this podcast, it doesn't naturally happen. Mm-hmm. Our natural tendency is to love the people we're comfortable with. It's not to push the envelope beyond the borders and go into the prison that you talked about, or to love the person we disagree with. I think that type of love, it comes through what we call grace. It comes through, back to the beginning of the podcast, becoming aware and dialed into the presence of God in our lives, which is why I always make the argument, the prayer is the number one challenge facing the church. Challenging people to pray is the number one challenge. And there's, of course, different ways to do that. I know you have a contemplative prayer workshop coming up where you're going to teach really silent meditation, Christian silent meditation.
Yeah,
as
you
a
can
form
go
of
really,
prayer.
really deep with it, but I try to go very, very simple with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's this idea, though, that the ultimate goal of the Christian life is to participate in, I love the Brother Lawrence line, the practice of the presence of God. If you don't know who Brother Lawrence is, he was a monk. I think he was French. And he worked in the kitchen in some monastery, and he was a very holy man, so much so that they had a priest go and interview Brother Lawrence because he didn't even write his own book. A priest interviewed him and said, "What's your secret?"
Right.
And Brother Lawrence said, "I try to take the same attitude that I have in a worship service with me in everything I do. I try to take that basic, God is here with me now, even as I wash the dishes, approach to living into all that I do." That's it in a nutshell. So as we become aware of that presence through prayer, whatever means that we choose to utilize, that's it. That's it in a nutshell.
Just acknowledging the presence is prayer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well, the idea of contemplation. Boy, I don't have the verse in front of me, but there's this line in Paul's writings where he says, "And we gaze at the presence of God, and we become like that presence, transformed from glory into glory." We'll have to maybe use that, and I'll bring that up. It's in 2 Corinthians, though. And so what's he saying there? Well, as we gaze at the presence of God, it's the presence of God that transforms us. We, over time, I'm going to say supernaturally become like the presence that we're gazing at. To use an analogy from our grade school days, our mothers told us, you become who you hang out with.
Yeah.
Right? So
you can know a person by the people they hang out with.
If you're gazing at the presence of God on a regular basis, the presence of, as I can tell, the only God, the loving God, we become like that God naturally. It's not like we're forcing it. It just becomes who we are. So, yeah.
Well, you wrapped up your sermon with a personal story about something that happened right here at church.
Yeah. A few Sundays ago now, I just got home from vacation, and I was slapping the sermon together because I was gone on vacation, and sitting in my office about 7:30 in the morning, get a knock on the door, and someone's there saying, "We have a guest that walked in off the street, and they thought that I should probably go talk to them." And I immediately think to myself, no, I shouldn't. I have really important holy things to do.
Too busy for that.
I have a sermon, I have a sermon to preach. And so I finally gathered myself and got my act together, and I went out and introduced myself to him, and he was sitting in the atrium. He had a cup of coffee, had a trail mix bar, and we had a pretty good conversation. He told me where he was from. I told him a little bit about myself, and I also said, if you hang around, there'll be some donuts here. So I hope you stay around long enough to get some of those donuts. And it wasn't just me. There was other people from the congregation that were being very friendly, not overbearing, but welcoming. And any case, I get pulled away from my conversation with this man, and I'm gone for like 7, 8, 10 minutes, and I come back, and he's gone. I get to looking around. Where's he at? He's gone. And I look over, and on the table close to where he was at, there was that same trail mix bar, and underneath it was a $100 bill. I was just shocked. I'd never had anything like that happen before, but it's just this idea that, let's not get too complicated here. Love the people that God brings into our life in a concrete way, because you just don't know how long they're going to be there.
Right.
And, I was very proud of the church, because it wasn't just me, of course, that did this. The janitor noticed him outside. The organist invited him in. They came and got me. Members of the congregation welcomed him. It really was a collective effort. Yeah.
Maybe we'll see him again.
I hope so. I do. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're coming up on Palm Sunday, and I'm going to read the text for that. And we're going to go with the epistle lesson from Philippians. I'm preaching, and I will allude to, of course, the triumphal entry, Jesus' entry into Jerusalem on that final Sunday before Holy Week. But this is Philippians 2, 5 through 11, and Paul writes, "Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, assuming human likeness, and being found in appearance as a human. He humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore God exalted him even more highly and gave him the name that is above every other name, so that at the name given to Jesus every knee should bend in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father." What a wonderful description of Jesus and who Jesus is and the work of Jesus. But if we're not careful, we can get so caught up in the wonder of that, we forget the very first verse. Let the same mind be in you. Mm-hmm. This is for you. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus. Wow, how much potential is there in that thought? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of the way I'm going. It's only Tuesday. A lot could change between now and then, but wow, I think we so quickly put ourselves down and we think we're so low and we can only accomplish so much. But he says, let the same mind be in you that's in Christ Jesus.
Well, yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about having faith in Christ, but we fail to realize how much faith Christ has in us.
Right.
I mean, he handed it over to the disciples and they handed it over to others and so on and so forth. There's a tremendous amount of faith in us that God must have to give us this opportunity and responsibility that we do have to be faithful people.
All right. Very good. Well, we're coming up on Palm Sunday. You're invited, listeners, you're invited to join us here in person at church. Maybe you're listening from a distance and you can't do that. You can worship with us virtually. We just want you to know that you're welcome to join us here in any way that you can and that you want to. But we really appreciate the fact that you're listening to our podcast. We hope to talk to you again next week.
This has been the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy. You are welcome to join us at Methodist Temple in person or online. Methodist Temple is at 2109 Lincoln Avenue in Evansville, Indiana. Our traditional Sunday morning worship service is at 8:30 with our contemporary service at 11. Log on to our website at methodisttemple.church. We see Christ in you.